Today, we're seeing two health companies, competitors, each with over 130 years of experience, coming together to help write a more hopeful chapter in our battle against COVID-19. I've not hesitated to use my power under the Defense Production Act to expedite critical materials in vaccine production, such as equipment, machinery, and supplies. And it's not just Johnson & Johnson and Merck. Pfizer, Moderna also work closely with us to help speed up the delivery of millions more doses.
So starting things off tonight, we're going to talk about the president's stimulus package. Of course, he's expected to sign it soon, now that Congress has gone ahead to pass it. But in large part, the House did the final passage of this bill, this stimulus package, $1.9 trillion, mostly on partisan lines, mostly Democrats, pushing this through in order to provide enough, what they claim to be enough coverage and financial relief and recovery for the American people, particularly poor people. So joining me now, West Coast Connection in the House, attorney Timothy Allen Simon and attorney Mark Harris, both of them political strategists and commentators. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Mark, I'd like to begin with you. You're the economist in the room. Not only you're a civil rights attorney, but you also serve as an economist. What does this stimulus mean for so many American families that have been hard pressed financially because of this COVID-19 pandemic?
Relief. I think that's the word that I would use in describing this, Kelly, relief. I'm one of the ones who has said that I would have liked to see more specificity as to how this money was to be spent. 1.9 trillion, we already have a federal budget deficit of $4.83 trillion right now. We're adding another $1.9 trillion of debt without figuring out what the resources, the revenues will be to offset that. So that's a substantial amount of money, of course, and it will bring relief. But I sure would like to see more specificity to make sure there aren't a lot of pork barrel projects, special projects for members in their districts that have nothing to do with COVID relief. I'd like to see more articulation of what's actually in the bill for me to feel more comfortable.
Well, Timothy, on the political side, as you know, what Mark just talked about in terms of finding the specificity of where this money is going to go, many Republicans have used that as part of their argument, saying this is nothing more than a liberal, free spending boondoggle, and that it really doesn't meet the needs of COVID-19. What say you? Are the Republicans being soured on this and just putting this out there when so many Americans have claimed that they support this and need it?
Well, I agree with Mark that, in my view, it probably should have been larger, quite frankly. But where I disagree, I did watch the president and Congress target allocations in order to attempt to pull back the Democrats that were gravitating towards the Republican side. The Republicans can complain all they want. I understand that. That's what they do. They're the counterpuncher, in this battle. But I guarantee you the Republicans who receive their checks are going to deposit them. They're going to cash them. Okay. The polls have showed that the vast majority of people in this country recognize what, unfortunately, the Republican Congress does not, that this is a war. We've had over a half a million casualties. And our economy, though showing signs of coming back, is very fragile right now and it's in the tank. I think the stimulus makes sense. I love the messaging, shots in the arm, money in the pocket. Reverend Jesse Jackson once said to me that you have to message in a way that a fourth grader understands. So I applaud the bill. I applaud what appears will be a victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and all of those in this country who want to move on from this devastating pandemic, one of the worst in our history.
We're also talking about COVID-19 and how this money can help address getting those vaccinations out, those vaccinations that are so needed. We're seeing now some 93 million Americans already vaccinated. The President of the United States stating that his goal is to make sure that all Americans are vaccinated by the end of May. Will this stimulus package help do that?
That's a good question, Kelly. We're not sure. I mean, to quote former President Ronald Reagan, we should trust but verify. I mean, the reality reality of this circumstance is I'm most concerned that the communities of color, particularly Latinx and Black communities, are undercounted so far relative to access to and receipt of the vaccine. So I want to see more efforts in that way. I think Stacey Abrams and all the great folks in Georgia were very clear about what they did to turn that election around. They went where the people were: barbershops, beauty shops, restaurants, hangout spots. That's what should happen here. We should be willing to give a person a vaccination wherever they will receive it: in church, in the restaurant. We had a discussion before we went on air about chitlins. I don't partake, but if it's the chitlin shack in somebody's town, that's where the doggone vaccine needs to be given. So if part of that $1.9 trillion is going towards that, I'm all in favor of it. But so far, I couldn't name 5 specifics out of this program as to how that money's going to be spent, Kelly. And I would challenge your viewers to name 5 off the top of their head. The fact that we don't know it is partly our problem, but it's also the problem of the Biden administration and of Congress, in my opinion.
Well, Mark, I understand your point. And Timothy, the president has stated now that it is done. The White House has stated, I should say, that the president will be on a tour, if you will, to tell people what's in the bill, what it means, and what this $1.9 trillion will do in terms of following up with what it's called the American Rescue Act, or the American Rescue Plan, in rescuing America from the throes of this pandemic, and also trying to make sure that equity is there so that people are getting the vaccinations in these marginalized places, namely inner city communities and rural areas that are hard to get. What do you think about that fact that the president has to roll this out and do the image making now that the sausage making has been done to make the bill a law?
100 million additional vaccines from Johnson & Johnson, expanding the distribution to the Dollar General chain of stores, which touches rural and the hood in terms of the term using the hood, or the higher concentration of our people. I think there are steps. We in the Bay Area are seeing churches partake in vaccination. I applaud the administration. I'll be quick to criticize this president, as I've criticized every president. But in this particular case, he's bringing sanity back to the fight. He's coming on the heels of someone that said it was a hoax, over 500,000 deaths. So I'm seeing things that I find are positive, shots in the arm, the opening of schools, providing schools with the resources that they need, support for businesses, support for families. I'm just seeing things that, in my view, are very positive. Yes, trust and verify. Talk is cheap. The actual implementation is where the challenge comes in. But in terms of where I'm sitting in San Francisco, almost everyone I know has at least had their first shot. I get my second on Thursday. We've moved down to school teachers and first responders and other essential workers. So I'm seeing progress. I'm not disagreeing with Mark. I'm just saying that I see progress.
We'll be back with more after the break.
This legislation is one of the most transformative and historic bills any of us will ever have the opportunity to support. It's one of the most transformative that I have seen in my over 30 years in the Congress. It is as consequential as the Affordable Care Act, which expanded health care to more than 20 million people and made benefits much better for over 150 million families.
And as you know, as we've stated, Republicans don't like this bill, but yet there are a lot of Republicans living beyond those representatives that they have in the Senate and the House, saying we want to see this bill implemented so that we too can benefit from it, along with Democrats. The American people favor this bill. But let me drill down just a little bit further here. The progressives, although not happy with the fact that the $15 minimum wage hike was removed, they're still passing this, and they're still in favor of this because of what it means for the American people. And we will wait and see how that happens, how it helps and benefits the American people. But we're talking about President Biden's biggest accomplishment thus far, and he will have to earn it and wear it regardless of how it goes. He has to lift it up or it can tear him down. Having said that, Mark, do you anticipate that the president will revisit that hike of the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour at some point?
I, I sure hope so. You know, it's interesting. A couple of things that you said I think need to be responded to. First, you know, I'm with Attorney Simon. I'm with Timothy. This is a much better situation that we're in now than we were in 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago under the former president. I want to be clear about that. I feel that there's hope, and it's substantive hope. It's not just wishful thinking. It's substantive hope, and I'm in complete favor of that. To your point exactly, I think the reality, I'm in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I know sometimes your viewers, when they hear me quote Ronald Reagan and some of the other things I do, probably think I'm more conservative than I am, but I'm an AOC progressive Democrat. I'm a Bernie Sanders Democrat. And so as far as I'm concerned, we went along with this and we support it, but there should have been the $15 minimum wage. You know, to have a national minimum wage that's $7.25. I don't know if your viewers are aware of that. We in California have a minimum wage that's twice that size. The country needs to have that. And if you talk about a livable wage, Kelly, a livable wage is probably $25 or more an hour. If you're in New York or Washington, D.C. or Baltimore or Boston or Atlanta, all the major metropolitan areas, it's almost impossible to live on $15 an hour. So the reality is we have more work to do. I hope the next step is to go after the federal minimum wage increase. If it's $15, that's fine. I'd love to see it be higher than that. But I think you're right that there's more to come.
And Timothy, you know, more to come. So stay tuned, folks, because there's a lot more that President Biden wants to do for this country and healing the soul of America and providing equity for everyone. But getting back to what Mark was saying about that livable wage and raising the minimum wage, gee whiz, you know, at In-N-Out Burger there in California, they're making $18 an hour.
That's real.
So Timothy, at some point, we've got to be able to save those folk who are working 40 hours a week and still living in poverty.
Yeah, I think they should look closely at Florida, which voted for Donald Trump and also voted for a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour. I do not believe that Republicans are in touch with their lower income supporters that are not going to turn down a raise, are not going to turn down an increase. I think if President Biden continues on the path of saying, I'm putting benefits into the working class, you know, 83% of Americans did not benefit from the tax cut that President Trump pushed through, largest tax cut in history, even though one could argue that the economy did. Okay, I get that. I listen to both sides. But I think the Republicans are making a mistake in trying to tell someone who's barely putting food on the table that you shouldn't have an increase. And the other side of that is, and I know Mark knows this as an economist, we are subsidizing those low-wage workers as taxpayers. There are people that work for McDonald's, work for Walmart, work for other organizations that go and then apply for public subsidies because they're at such low wage. They qualify for those public subsidies. That is something that should not really, in my view, be tolerated. I think there are certain small businesses that are probably exempt, but overall, a living wage should be the societal floor, not the ceiling.
Gentlemen, we'll take a break, and when we come back, I want to shift the focus entirely from the stimulus package that's out there now, and a lot of people are talking about it today and will be for the foreseeable future. And I want to focus on what's going on in Minneapolis as it relates to the trial involving the accused murderer and of George Floyd. That's next. Welcome back to the program. I'm talking to the West Coast Connection in the house this week. And next week, things changes with a new show that's coming on. I'll drop that in right now. We're expanding the Kelly Wright Show into, it's going to morph into The World Tonight with Kelly Wright and Naira Hawk. That will be on 5 to 7 every night, Monday through Friday, here on the Black News Channel. The West Coast Connection will still be there with me, contributing as always, as greatly as they do. But look, I would be remiss if I didn't bring in my good friends, Mark Harris, who's a member of the Ben Crump Law team. He's a partner with the Ben Crump Law Firm, which of course is directly involved with the George Floyd family. And then Timothy Allen Simon, who of course is the owner of TAS Strategies, former commissioner with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and also the chairman of the board of directors of the California African American Chamber of Commerce. So both of you are so familiar with this case with George Floyd. And both of you remember the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that we watch George Floyd crying out, "I can't breathe," and crying out for his mother. We have talked about this on this show so many times. As this case unfolds and we're still in the jury selection process, I want to know and hear your hearts about what you anticipate as this trial moves forward. Mark, I'll begin with you.
Kelly, as you know, my colleague and friend Ben Crump joined me on your show when this first opened up. When Mr. Floyd was assassinated, we were honored to have Ben Crump join me on your show and talk to your viewers about it. Here we are all this time later, and we have the civil case, which is still moving through the process. People ask me all the time, has the civil case either been adjudicated or settled? The answer is no. We're still slogging through on that front. But on the criminal side, one of the best aspects of this is the fact that the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, the Honorable Keith Ellison, took this case over. He didn't leave it to the local Minneapolis prosecutors. I think that is a very important step in assuring that we see some level of credible prosecution of former officer Derek Chauvin. The issue that's before the public right now, that's before the court and shared with the public, is this issue of whether the charge of third-degree murder will be added. Because the prosecutors feel that if the jury is unwilling to prosecute former officer Chauvin at the higher levels, they may be willing to go for the lesser level of third-degree murder. I actually agree with that tactic and strategy. I think that you want to give the jury the widest range of options in terms of finding former officer Chauvin guilty for his just reprehensible behavior. I hope they do the right thing and come back with a verdict at the higher level. But strategically, it's important to get that third-degree murder charge included in this process.
Timothy, how do you see this case going? And we don't know how it will turn out. We've seen other cases where people were on pins and needles waiting for a jury to be selected, and then looking at the entire case and then being shocked with verdicts that were acquittals or not guilty. I just want to know what your impression is of this case as we move forward.
Well, I think it's going to have landmark results. One, it is at the exact same time as the George Floyd Act legislation that's going through Congress. And it will be addressing the issue, which is usually why it's so difficult to prosecute rogue police officers like Officer Chauvin, is what's called qualified immunity. And the unions, the police unions, place this into legislation to protect their members. So I think the trial will not only hopefully result, and I do agree with Attorney Harris in adding that third-degree murder charge. You have to actually kind of lower the bar in these cases because of qualified immunity and have something to get a conviction of some sort, because the vast majority of police officers walk. So I do think it's going to give a greater awareness to the public as to why we need police reform, why we need to deal with unions more aggressively who are pushing for these immunities and other privileges. We have one city here in California that went bankrupt largely behind police and fire unions, and there are about 4 or 5 others that are on the brink. I think the whole discussion of law enforcement and and the role that law enforcement plays in our communities is now actually up for discussion. And I think that's a positive thing. As George Floyd's daughter said, my father is going to change the world. and that when we're watching that unfold before us.
Indeed, we are. Gentlemen, as always, it's always a pleasure to have you on. My good friends from the West Coast connection in the house on the Kelly Wright Show, attorneys Mark Harris and Timothy Allen Simon. Coming up next, we'll talk about COVID-19 and the vaccinations. One doctor will weigh in on the matter after the break.